Hello and welcome, or hopefully it's welcome back to USA Global TV and Radio. I'm Dr. JACALYN KERBECK, and our show today is Loving Longevity. And we have a fabulous show for you today with a dynamite guest and a superstar co host. Let's welcome Annie Bush to the program. Hi, Annie. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and hopefully welcome back. But if this is your first time, welcome to Loving Longevity.
And for those of you who haven't met Annie before, she is a holistic longevity strategist and she has insights, experience that is wide and deep that she can share with you to help you feel better and live the best version of your life. We also have a great guest that you brought to the program again, another fabulous guest. Thank you so much. But Annie, I'm going to spotlight you for people who are like, ooh, who is Annie and what does she do? How can I work with her? Please tell us.
Well, I've been in the health and wellness space industry community, whatever you want to call it, for over 10 years, almost a decade now, actually. And I started out as a personal trainer, then a health coach, and then a brain health coach. And, part of longevity is always being curious and always learning and expanding your base of knowledge. And I've come up with this longevity umbrella, this holistic longevity umbrella to include everything that I've learned up to this point about fitness, about nutrition, about mindset, about mindfulness, and recently about DNA. And we'll be talking about a lot about this in the next few weeks, but I am now certified by 3X4 Genetics to do DNA analysis. And your DNA is your blueprint. It's the divine creation, your blueprint of your health. And to extend that longevity, one of the things I've been using for now since December is the LifeWave stem cell activation patches. Now, if you've heard about stem cells, you've probably heard about the movie stars and the politicians and the athletes traveling out of the country to get injections and yada, yada, yada. Well, guess what? David Schmidt of LifeWave has created this patch. It looks very unassuming, but it's very powerful. For those of you in radio land, it's about an inch in diameter circle. It looks like a Band-Aid, but in the middle is a crystal matrix that basically absorbs your body heat and then reflects back into your body a certain wavelength of light. And using the concepts of photobiomodulation and acupuncture, it will reflect these wavelengths down the meridians of the body in those energy pathways to do things like, yes, stimulate your own stem cells. What do your stem cells do? They go and repair any damage that you may have, liver, kidneys. Those of you with autoimmune, you have an underlying condition of leaky gut. Guess what? The patch will go and patch up your leaky gut. So we'll be talking more about the stem cell patches and the connection with your DNA. But that was one of the game changers for me as far as longevity is concerned. So back to you, Dr. JACALYN.
Thank you so much. I want to introduce our guest, but before I do, I'd love to have you share how you two connected. Did you reach out to him?
It was interesting. I have a friend, his publicist, Stuart, asked me the same question right before we came on. He's like, why don't you talk about how you guys met or got together? I have a friend who has a local radio show, and she had actually interviewed James, and I don't know if she interviewed both James and Anne, but then she sent me this message, you need to have him on your program. And it's interesting because this is his book, I Used to Have Cancer, and it's amazing. We're going to be talking about it in detail. But his other half, Anne, has a book. It's called Radical Longevity. And we're keeping our fingers crossed to get her on the program too. But as I was reading through her book, she starts talking about the LifeWave X39 stem cell patches. So I was like, oh my God, we're all coming together. So that's how and so I contacted Stuart, who is his publicist, and it's been taking a while to get our dates coordinated, but we finally got James on to tell us a magnificent story of how he healed himself of cancer using the power of prayer and natural remedies. And it's, I'm like a little kid that I just want to, sit back and just really just take it all in.
Well, thank you so much, Annie. I appreciate it. You gave part of the intro already, which is fabulous. So, as you mentioned, James Templeton is a 35-year-old plus, whatever that plus is. I use that on myself. Cancer survivor who healed himself from a terminal diagnosis with the use, as you said, Annie, of alternative medicine and healing modalities. And he captured this whole process in writing in his book, I Used to Have Cancer, How I Found My Own Way Back to Health. He also founded the Templeton Wellness Foundation, and he is using his wisdom and his experience to help other people. And we love that, don't we? That's what we're all about here on this channel. So let's bring him out and hear directly from him. Welcome, James Templeton.
Well, it's great to be with y'all. And, I know you're down in Florida. So when I say y'all, you know exactly what I mean. It's great to be with you. I've heard a lot of great things about your show.
Well, thank you so much. And just a quick aside, Annie and I are both in Florida, but she's tan and I look like I'm in the Arctic or something. But anyway, James, you're joining us from Idaho. I just wanted our audience to know that. That's really fantastic. And I know from just our brief chat backstage, you've been doing a number of interviews to get the message out, because especially through the pandemic, and now some people are really experiencing the long-term effects, whether it's mental illness, maybe it's a cancer diagnosis. There's all kind of things that are coming up for people. So you've been out there letting people know that you don't have to go the traditional route. That might be the route, but there's some other options for you. So tell us a little bit more, and with your journey and how you came to make these decisions.
Well, I agree 100%. There's so much a person can do. And especially when they're told you're kind of like at the end of the rope, there's always something you can do. And I've interviewed people on Templeton Wellness, quite a few people that have gone through similar situations like myself, that have overcome stage 4 or late stage cancer. So there's so much you can do. But my story all started, over almost 37 years this year. And I was living in Texas, and I'm from Texas. I'm a fifth generation Texan, and you can probably tell from the backdrop back here. I always liked Western art, and at one point I had a small ranch, and I was living in Texas on this small ranch, and I thought I had everything going for me. I had several businesses. I was just doing very well. I was married. I had a little daughter that was not even 2 years old yet. And I guess you could say I thought I had life by the tail. I thought everything was going great. And I was in, I thought, good physical fitness shape. I exercised on a regular basis. I was one of these runners that you see running all over the place all the time. And I was just trying to stay fit because my father and my grandfather both died of heart disease at a very young age. And I thought that, if I didn't take care of myself, maybe I would be the next one. So that's why I was doing this. But I was just a regular guy. I was very ambitious, and I thought that life was in a good place for me. And uh, when it really started for me was when I went to the doctor one day and had a stress test done because I wanted to see how well I was doing. And and the reason I went all of a sudden to get this stress test done because had been reading about this fitness guru back in those times. He was a runner and all this. His name was Jim Fix. And Jim Fix was this guy that said that the key to health is to run, and you can eat what you want pretty much and do what you want as long as you kind of keep yourself in really tip top shape. So I went to the office one day and I read the newspaper, and on the headlines it says Jim Fix dies and of a heart attack while running. And I was just like, oh my God. So that shocked me so much. I couldn't believe it. So that's why I was down there at this doctor's office getting this stress test done. And when I got in there, the doctor says, "Let's get you on the treadmill test." So he got me on the treadmill and he hooked me up with all these wires and everything. And he said, "Look," he said, "you're in tremendous shape." He says, "Whatever you're doing, you just keep it up." He says, "You broke the all-time record in the office here on this test." And he says, "I think, you're going to go a long time. So don't worry about that." And he did a thorough checkup of me, just head to toe. And on the way out of the office, he says, "You're in great shape. You're doing a lot of great things." But he said, "There's only one thing that I could tell you today." He says, "You've got a mole on your back." And he said, "It looks a little different to me." He said, "It looks a little strange to me." But he says, "I don't think it's anything. I wouldn't worry about it. But when you get a chance, go to a dermatologist, get it checked out." And so I didn't think anything about it. So what did I do? I kind of waited a little while and then I decided to go get it checked out by a dermatologist. I went in the dermatologist's office and he looked at it like he had seen a ghost or something and got all excited and was jumping around and everything. And he says, "Oh my God," he says, "I think you have melanoma." And I'm like, "Melanoma? How could I have melanoma?" And he says, "Well, I think you have it. And we're going to probably have to do surgery really quick and remove a large portion of your back." And here I go in there thinking I had life by the tail and everything was going great. And now it's a whole different person. All of a sudden it changed just like that. And I'm like this guy that's scared to death, stressed out. And I didn't like his bedside manner. So I decided to get up and leave. And I said, "I'll check back with you shortly." And I went home and I was so stressed out. I decided then to get another opinion. So I go to another doctor that I'd been to before, a dermatologist, and he says, "Well, it looks, kind of a little different to me." He says, "I'm a little suspicious of it also." And he says, "I think that, you know, uh, if it is that, it's probably an early stage. It won't be anything to it." And I've seen a lot of people that had melanoma and they're doing fine now. And so, that made me feel a little bit better. But he says, "I'm not going to mess with it. I'm going to send you to an oncologist, which is renowned, and he's right here in Houston. That's where I was living, near Houston." And he says, "This guy will know exactly what it is and he'll take care of it for you." And he says, "If you got to see anybody, this is the guy." So, okay, I'm excited now, at least a little bit, thinking that, hey, it's probably an early stage if it is anything. And this guy's going to help me, and nobody else is going to be better than him. So I'll go to him. So I go see this guy, and he says, "Well, it looks a little suspicious to me, also." He says, "Let's just, take it out. We'll take it out right now and see exactly what it is." So he took a big chunk out of my back and he says, "There's nothing you can do right now. Go home, relax. Nothing to worry about. Chances are it won't be anything." So, that was easier for him to say because I was worried already. And I go out of the doctor's office and he said, "On the way out, I'll talk to you in a few days." Well, I got home, I was pacing the floor, couldn't sleep at night. It was like this guy that thought he had everything going was kind of happy go lucky before that. Now he's all uptight, up, stressed out, and couldn't sleep. So I'm like worried a lot, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, after a week or so, how come I haven't heard from this doctor? So about another week went on, and it was almost 2 weeks, and then I got a phone call from the doctor, and he says, "Well," he said, "James, I got some good news and I got some bad news." And he says, you know, uh, "The good news is you've got melanoma." And I thought, "Good news? How could that be good news?" He goes, "Wait a minute before you start thinking anything." He said, "The good news is you've got melanoma, but we think we got it around the perimeter of this area. there's no signs of any of the cancer. So that's a great thing. But he said the bad news is it's very deep. It's deep into the tissue, and that means it's stage 4. And he said chances are it's going to spread into other parts of the body, and we got to really keep a sharp eye on it. And you need to come in every 3 months and get checked out, and we just got to stay ahead of it. Chances are we won't ever see it again. That's what we're going to hope for. So I did what he said. I went in and I was, stressed out all the time, and I started reading about melanoma and stage 4 melanoma, and it didn't look so great, but I thought, well, maybe I'll be one of the lucky ones. So I went to the doctor and I did everything, and before I knew it, it was time to go again to the doctor, and I got checked again, and it was fine. Everything was fine. But then shortly after that, I discovered a lump in my groin area, and it felt like a kind of like a large marble. And I thought, oh my gosh. So I called the doctor, and he says, well, come on in and let's look at it. And he looked at it. And long story short, he said, let's just go in and let's just see what this is. It's probably nothing. It's probably just, a lymph node that got irritated or something. So I wouldn't worry about it. But let's go in the hospital tomorrow, and it's probably just be a little bitty incision. Won't be anything to it. So he put me in there, and I went in, and I woke up from the surgery, and I knew it wasn't just a little bit of an incision, and I had all these bandages all over me, and I went, "Oh my goodness, I'm in trouble now. This doesn't seem good to me." And I was about half out of it. He comes in, he says, "Well, I'm sorry to tell you, James," he said, "but this cancer has spread. It's spread into your lymphatic system." He says, "And that's what we were afraid of, but it's happened, and we're going to have to get very aggressive with treatment." And he says, let's just plan on doing 80 chemotherapy treatments. He said, this is going to be experimental. So it's all we know to do, the best thing we know to do. He says, most treatments don't respond very well to this kind of cancer. It's a very aggressive kind of cancer. And he says, we had to remove a large amount of lymph nodes in my groin. He says, you're going to have to do a lymph drainage pump for months. And you're going to have to do that on a daily basis, several times a day, because we don't want that leg to continue to swell, because now it was really swollen. He says, you could lose your leg. So you got to do that. We'll do these treatments, but we'll have to start once you've recovered a little bit. So, in about 3 weeks or so, we'll start those treatments. You just stay here in the hospital and recover from the surgery. So, after that, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like doesn't sound good to me. I'm sound like a blowed up duck here, And I asked the doctor, I said, listen, you know, what are my chances of this thing? I know you've seen a lot of people, and what kind of idea can you give me? He goes, well, he says, I don't know. They don't like to tell you. You got to kind of get it out of them, and they don't know because they're just looking at their experience and from other patients. But he says it's probably going to be 20% chance of survival if you can get through these 80 chemotherapy treatments. And he said if you can get through those, it's a 20% chance for 3 to 5 years, and after that, that's probably about the amount of time you'll have. And I'm like, oh, that's like awful. There's got to be something I can do. So here I am laying in that hospital bed like anybody would be, miserable, upset, in pain from the surgery. And I knew then that something had to change and I had to find something. And this is when it really started for me. It's the amazing part of the story. It was just about ready to start happening here.
And that's what I was going to ask you about. There's a point, and in the book where you there's a distinct pivot where you go from this mindset of like having to listen to these doctors and them telling you, there really isn't any hope. It's not really going to, and then you make this pivot.
Yep.
And then people are then brought to you with information and messages, and you refer to them as the 3 knocks on the door. Could you go ahead and get us to that? Because this is where you really
this
your
is
mindset.
where things can happen when you don't expect it. And this is where the higher power, whatever you want to call it, God, whatever, can step in sometimes and give you the answers you need. But I was laying there and I was feeling really bad about things, and all of a sudden I got a phone call, and I answered the phone, and I was there laying in the hospital bed, and on painkillers and morphine and all that stuff, because that's what happens. And I'm laying there, and this voice said, "James," he says, "this is Ron Sumter." And he says, and Ron Sumter was my minister at a church that I went to. He says, "I want you to know that we're praying for you, and everybody is really pulling for you in town." And he says, "I want you to know if anybody can beat this cancer, you can." He says, "Don't you give in to this." He says, "You're a tough guy." And he says, you just have to dig in, and don't accept what they tell you." And he says, "You beat this so-and-so cancer." And I mean, the words he said were, pretty outrageous for me to hear him. I've never heard him talk like that. And it got my attention. And, he said some 4-letter words. And I'm laying there and I'm like, "Oh my God, did I hear that right?" So he says, "You're going to beat this one way or another." So I just started to pray after he hung up. And I prayed like I never prayed before in my whole life. And I just felt like a whole different thing, praying like every cell in my body was involved in this prayer. And I don't know, it's an out of body experience kind of. I never felt like that. And I, had tears in my eyes, and I was just it was like out of desperation, but it was a different kind of feeling that I'd ever experienced. And when I got through praying, uh, probably 20 minutes later, I got a knock on the door. And here comes a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in 7 years, a college buddy. And he comes through the door and he's got these papers in his hand. And he says, "I heard about you from a friend of ours." And he says, "We were at lunch yesterday and we were sitting around talking with a friend or two of mine. And one of them said, 'Look, I heard about a story about a guy that healed himself of cancer using a natural diet and lifestyle.' He said, 'Why don't you give him this article, and it might help him.'" So my friend's driving around the general area and he's thinking about he wants to come see me in the hospital, but he didn't know if it was the right time or not. He's kind of like, "Should I do this? What should I do?" And it's something inside of him said, "Get in that hospital and give him this information." And he was happened to be in that area, and he drives into the hospital. He comes up to my room. Here he is coming through the door, and he's telling me that, there's an article here in his hand about a guy that healed himself with a diet and lifestyle. Well, instantly I said, "I'm going to do what that guy did. This is what I'm supposed to do." He goes, "You haven't even seen this yet." And I said, "I don't have to see it. I'm going to read it and I'm going to learn about it, but that's what I'm going to do." So all of a sudden I had this huge energy come over me that gave me this excitement. Like I've got something to look forward to here. I got some hope finally here, that I'm going to use, and I'm going to find all about this, and I'm going to do what he said. Well, it was about a guy, and the guy was on television at the time. His name was Dirk Benedict, and he was in a TV show, and he was he was this uh, the A Team was the name of the show. I had to think about it for a minute. The A Team was a show, and he was the younger guy, the good-looking guy, the blonde-headed guy that was on that show. Anybody my age is going to remember that show. But I knew of the show. But anyway, this guy had what he thought was prostate cancer, and he had all the symptoms and all this stuff, and he just said, I'm not going through all this chemo and all this stuff. I'm going to find a way and I'm going to change my diet and all this. Well, he found a diet lifestyle. It was called the macrobiotic diet. And I'd never heard of anything like that. I said, what in the world is that? What is that? Because where I come from, you go to the doctor and you do whatever they say. And then now I'm hearing about all this stuff, but I'm excited. So anyway, I got excited and I had my friend go out and get this book, and he found it and he brought it back that afternoon, and I couldn't put it down. I was so excited. I said, if this guy can do it, I can do it too. I'm going to show everyone. And that's when I started to really get those 3 knocks started to happen right in a row. This was the first knock. Number 2 knock. The next day, here comes my stepmother through the door.
And wait, I'm gonna pause you just for a minute and tell the listeners and the viewers to remember macrobiotic diet, because that led you to the Institute on the East Coast. But just keep that in your mind as you're listening to the story. Okay, so the first knock, the messenger brought you the macrobiotic diet.
Yes.
The second knock was your stepmother.
Stepmother came through the door and she had a book in her hand. That was the next morning, and she didn't know anything about what I had discovered. She comes through the door. She says, "Oh, we've got an article a book from a relative that was sent over to you, and it's about vitamin C and cancer. And it's interesting, and it's by a fellow by the name of Linus Pauling." Well, I didn't know who Linus Pauling was, but Linus Pauling was this guy done years of research with vitamin C on cancer and heart disease. And anyway, this book talked about how people that had, late stage cancer, people that weren't doing well, they could take high dose vitamin C, and many of these people were doing so much better. And as long as they took the vitamin C, they hung around. I mean, these were people that had 2 or 3 days to live, and now they're taking this high dose vitamin C, and then these people are doing very well, and some of them surviving for a long time, and some for long time. And I just said, well, I'm going to do this vitamin C. If that'll work for these people, then why not do that also? I'll do the vitamin C. I'm going to do the macrobiotic diet and lifestyle. And, now I'm really excited. I got 2 things that's going to really make me have some hope, have something to look forward to, feel like that I've got a way to recover from this detrimental diagnosis. So the next day I'm laying in the hospital. Here comes another knock on the door. I'm laying there, and all of a sudden this fella comes through the door. He's the psychotherapist. And he comes in, he says, well, he said, James, he says, I've heard you've been really depressed. You haven't been feeling well. And I understand you had the surgery and all that, but you've been, mentally having a rough time with this. Well, I had been. I was very down and out and didn't know what I was going to do. He says, can I come and talk to you? I said, well, sure. You can come talk to me. He said, I'd like to come over first thing in the morning and talk to you. I said, okay. All right. So when he comes the next day, he says to me, he says, can I sit down over here? He says, but first thing, right off the bat, I said, listen, have you ever heard of the macrobiotic diet? And he says, hold on a second. And he just took off for the door. I'm thinking he's going to go close the door and leave because the door was open. He goes over that door. He kind of looks out in the hall, and he comes back and shuts that door, fully shuts it. He comes back down. He sits down. He says, yes, I have heard about this. but I'm going to tell you what I know about it. But you got to promise me you won't tell anybody that we had this conversation. I don't want to lose my job, my pension, and all that. He says, it's not worth it, but I want to help you. And I've seen so many good things with this diet. He said, I tried to do it, but it's too much. It's a lot of work, takes a lot of dedication. He said, but for the right minded person, it can be very, very helpful. And he says, there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. He says, you've got to do it the right way if you're going to have the results that you need. But he says, I think, you could seem to be the kind of guy that can do well with this. He said, because by the way, you don't seem so depressed after all. He said, you seem like you're kind of excited about something. And I told him about, the vitamin C and all that stuff, and I was excited. So anyway, I knew then that if this guy's going to come in there and do all these things that he did and close the door and secrecy and all this, that there's really something to this. So now I'm really excited. I'm going to go in and I'm going to do these treatments. This chemotherapy, this experimental chemotherapy, but then I'm going to do the vitamin C and I'm going to do this macrobiotic diet lifestyle. I'll do it all. If a little's good, a lot's better. So I decided that once I could, after I did my first round of chemo, which was terrible, I went home. I had to recover for 2 months and then come back and do more chemo because it takes that long to recover from it. And, it's just awful stuff. It was hypothermia. They'd raise your temperature as high as they could. And then they would, give you the chemo. It was about a 10-hour process each day. So I knew. So I went home and started trying to eat rice and beans and all that stuff. And I knew that it was going to take a little while to get going. But, I went back in and I wasn't doing well. I was losing a lot of weight. And the doctor came in and he says, I'm sorry, this chemo is not responding to your body very well. Your body just is rejecting it. That's why you're so sick and so weak. And he says, I don't know what else to do. And I said, well, I got it. There's got to be something I can do. He says, well, I don't know of anything else. I said, well, what would you do if it was your son or daughter? He goes, I'd do the same thing. I said, even if they died from this? And I knew I was just so thin and weak. And he says, well, that's all I know to do. Well, it made me so mad because I asked him, I said, what about a diet, vitamin C, things like that? Oh, none of that stuff works.
See, and
And
that's the opinion of the traditional medical industry.
and I tell
they
you, right then, he told me that, and I got so mad. And I just raised up in the bed and I said, listen here, you SOB. I didn't say it like that. I was mad and I was weak. I said, if I could get out of this bed, I would tear you apart.
well,
But he ran out that door.
well, I'm going to move us a little bit forward so that everybody knows that you got so mad that you left the hospital at 2:00 in the morning and got in your vehicle and went home. And then you started implementing the diet, the vitamin C. Tell us about, and there's a couple of quotes in the book, and one of them is at least 50% of winning the fight against cancer is believing in what you are doing.
Yes,
so
that's
here,
right.
So here you are now starting on this macrobiotic diet, high levels of vitamin C. Can you explain to us then, because we're running a little short, but I want to hit these points where that journey took you.
Well, I started the diet, and I can tell you, it took about 3 months before I started to feel really good. I had this chemo and all this, and I was weakened, but I started taking all the vitamin C, and I was taking as much as I could, and I found one that was time released, that was better absorbed and also buffered, so it was easier on my stomach. But I took 20,000 milligrams of vitamin C at that point. And I got on this diet and I was going to do it right. I wasn't going to cut any corners. And I read every book I could read and I did it. But after about 3 months, I just started feeling really, really good. Well, I knew that I was on to something then. And once you start to feel so much better and the energy was coming up and people were saying, "Oh, you're looking so much better." And, I was hungry, and I was eating as much as I could eat, but of the macrobiotic diet. But I'll tell you what, when I started to believe up here, that's when the healing really starts, because I found out just for myself, but not just for myself, but for many others too. Once you believe in something, you're really going to jump up a large notch, and you're going to start to do so much better. And you're going to feel like if it doesn't work for me, it's not going to work for anybody else. And I'm giving it 100%, and I'm not going to look back. And if something does happen to me, then I give it my 150% best shot. And that's really what happened. But when you're eating organic food and you're eating all this fiber and you're eating fermented foods that are healthy, because 80% of your immune system, that I found out later, is the gut, in the gut. It's the health of the gut, the probiotics. And when you're eating these foods, it breaks down into the good bacteria. Number one, all that fiber is so detoxifying, because most people that have any kind of cancer are very toxic. The immune system has been overwhelmed. It can't do its job the way it's supposed to. And I don't care if it's melanoma, or if it's breast cancer, or if it's prostate cancer, or if it's lung cancer. There's something in your system that's over and above the toxic levels that our bodies can deal with. And this is what was so powerful, this diet and lifestyle, because it was almost like a spiritual experience for me. I had to drop everything and really dedicate myself and roll up my sleeves. And like this doctor told me, this psychotherapist that came in, hey, you can't cut corners if you want to get the best results. So I made up my mind to chew my food. They say to chew your food 50 times. Well, I chewed it 180 times. I don't know where I got 180, but and that sounds crazy. But you chew your food until it's liquid. It takes a while to eat, but you know what? You never realize food can be so tasty, and you don't need all that sugar. And you got to keep the sugar down, and it does. And it keeps that sugar down really low. And the cancer thrives on sugar and toxicity and everything. So it's like taking a big broom and rushing it through your body, and it's amazing what it can do. There's a lot of good diets out there, and I think that the macrobiotic diet was there for me when I needed it, and it was an amazing experience.
And then you go out west and you meet another doctor, Dr. Parcells, who
Yes,
then approaches the whole subject of cancer in
yes,
terms of keeping the body in balance. That
yes,
actually what cancer is our body being out of balance. Can
yes.
you touch on that for a minute?
Well, I first went and I had uh, quite an experience for several years. I ended up living in the macrobiotic community on the East Coast, and I was the operations manager for several years out there. And I learned so much, and I met some very interesting people. And I discovered parasites, intestinal parasites, and how toxic that is and immunosuppressive it is. And I was told by a world renowned parasitologist that he'd never seen a case of cancer or AIDS that didn't have some kind of parasitic involvement. Well, I knew then that I was on to something. And I thought about all these people that had cancer, and what about, I wonder if they have parasites. He thinks they do. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking, what about all my friends that I had met that had cancer? And here I am on this detoxification plan to get rid of the parasites. And I started to feel so much better, started to gain my weight back and all that. And, I really dug into that. But eventually I ended up moving out to New Mexico because I loved the Santa Fe area. I'd I'd been out there for many times, and I knew there was a lot of health conscious people in the area, and I wanted to be in that kind of environment. So I
Mhm.
moved there, and then my life partner, Ann Louise Gittleman, which is very well known and has written many books. And this is a long story that I skipped a lot, but I talk about it in my book. But we ended up in Dr. Parcells' office. Dr. Parcells was one of her original teachers. And here's this lady that was a nutrition, PhD nutrition, chiropractor, and had almost died at the age of 42 herself of tuberculosis and all this, and healed herself naturally way back. I mean, this is before anybody knew anything about all this stuff. And she was there, and here she comes in the room, and she's over 100 when I met her. And I'm thinking she's going to be in a wheelchair or a walker or something. This woman was amazing. It was sharper than a 30-year-old. And I mean, just amazing. And I got to know her, and I worked with her some in her laboratory and got to see how she did her work and how she could help people energetically. And she told me there one day, we were sitting there, and she said, "Now listen here, honey." That's how she would talk. She'd say, "You're going to have to start eating meat again." And I wouldn't eat meat. I grew up on meat and potatoes and, all that. And I always was pretty healthy until at the age of 32, I found out I had that cancer. But being on the macrobiotic diet, I said, I'm never going to eat meat again. I'm never going to do. But I was really thin. I'd gotten really thin, and I thought I was healthy and all that. But for 6 years or so, I'd been on that diet, strict. So she says to me, "Come on in here, let's have some lunch." And so she had these beans and ham hocks and all this stuff, and I'm like, "Doctor, I can't eat this stuff. I'm sure it's good, but I can't eat it." She says, "Honey, you got to eat meat again." So I'm like looking at her. Here she's so vital. She's vibrant, and she looked so good I mean, she just was like, late 70s, 80 years old at the time, the way she acted. Here she's over 100. And I said, who could argue with her? So I went ahead. She says, "If you don't start, you're going to get sick again." Well, she knew more than anybody I'd ever met. That, I'd studied with Michio Kushi, and I knew him personally, and I looked up to them. But when I met her, I was like, oh my gosh. And, I have to do what she says. So it changed my life then. And I started to look outside the box, and, and started to take supplements, started to get into the more of a little higher realm of healing. And, the parasites was her first thing that she would do. It's like somebody has cancer. She wants to rule that out first. That was the first thing.
And and it's one thing about our program, Loving Longevity, that we started really emphasizing is this passing down of the knowledge. And that's James, that's what you're doing in your book. And I really recommend everybody to go pick out the book, because there's so much in here about what you can do for your health. But you are a living testament to her, and what she taught you. And again, there's the book is full of all the natural remedies that you used, the recommendations, the resources. So James, thank you so much for being on the program. We could probably talk for hours.
Oh yeah, we could.
Yeah, we definitely could.
And I can get into stories, and it goes on and on. But yeah, just get the book, because I learned so much from Dr. Parcells and the other things, and this is a really good place to start. And I've discovered new things, but this is a really good foundation in this book.
Absolutely.
James, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here, and we'd love to have you back to really dig deep into it. And congratulations on your success and for your fabulous health. I'm going to put up your banner again. If you could share with our audience who's not able to read your contact information, or maybe they're on the radio, would you please let people know how to reach out to you?
It's go to templetonwellness.com. And that's our foundation. And also check out Templeton List. TempletonList.com is our restaurant guide that is a list of the healthiest farm-to-table organic restaurants in America, and it's very easy, and there's a guide. It's off of Google Maps, and I have someone that works every day on this for several years. We got over 3,000 restaurants. So check that out, and you can email us at templetonwellness.com, James R. Stewart at templetonwellness.com. We'd love to hear from you. Check out all of our other interviews. I've interviewed the top doctors, top practitioners, and there's many more I'm interviewing, but that I feel are the top of the top, that you can get educated in a couple of days, get a lot of good education. You'll see other people that have similar stories to mine, and they detail a lot of things they've done. I think you'll really, really get turned in the right direction and be inspired and have some hope, because if I can do it, they can do it, then why can't you? And it's available. You just gotta make some changes in your life. So yes, it's been so good to be with you, Dr. JACALYN and Annie. It's really nice.
And in one of the quotes in your book, and I think this is a good way to end it, and you said, at any given moment, you have the power to say, this is not how my story is going to end.
Yes.
I love that. That's
You got to
great.
be a little stubborn and just, kick that wheel in. I always like to say, feed thy spirit,
Yes.
develop that killer instinct. Nothing's going to get me. If it does, I'm going to go down, kicking, clawing, punching, whatever it takes. Because, giving in, being too nice with this stuff is not good. Because I've met so many people that were so nice that had cancer, and many people had late stage cancer, and nice guys finish last with this stuff. I'm telling you, you got to be really, hard nosed with it.
How about a longevity instinct?
Yes, how about that? And how about our next show starts in 2 minutes? So we have to wrap up. That's okay. James, thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. Annie, I'm going to spotlight you if you can give your contact information as well.
Yes, thank you, James.
Thank you.
And yes, the easiest way to contact me is at my, there we go. The email is yourtotalbody@yahoo.com. That is yourtotalbody@yahoo.com. If you want to learn more about the stem cells, we have some information up. I don't know if it's up. Go to zoom.us. Oh, I can't see what the information is. Let me see. Hold on. Okay, go to zoom.us and use the Zoom code 379-717-7845. That's 379-717-7845. And we're going to have a whole discussion about the benefits of these stem cell patches, or, stay tuned for our interview with Anne, James's other half, and her book on radical longevity. And she talks about the patches there too.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, James. Thank you, Annie. Have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you.
Too. Bye-bye now.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We'll be coming right back with our next show, which is presenting Pet Psychic Amina, and we'll be back very shortly. So stay tuned. You can stay wherever you are. I'll run over to the other studio. And also, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is USA Global TV. Thank you. Take care. Bye.